southwestern Cape, we have the most diverse vegetation type in all the world. It's incredibly rich in biodiversity. An area like this is just one example of the beauty that this vegetation type is comprised of. Probably factors that influence this biodiversity and this extreme wealth of flowers is the fact that for quite a bit of the world's existence, and during the times of the ice ages, this place was relatively ice-free. So in other parts of the world that were locked up in ice, other plants were not able to actually grow and evolve, whereas the Cape was ice-free for longer periods, and they had that edge to develop and basically colonize all this new ground. The Cape itself, this part has been around 120 million years, kind of as a result of the split of Gondwanaland and all the mountains that got raised out of the ocean from one tectonic plate bumping into the other, forming this incredible new piece of earth, which is made up of all these old sedimentary ocean layers. And in this habitat, plants have evolved and diversified, growing on the soils that formed from this Table Mountain sandstone, which is this original sedimentary rock, and also other areas where the Cape granites, which go back even further, 600 million years, have also intruded and formed very acidic soils. So in this area we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have more plants per area than anywhere else, and in this reserve specifically we have more plants than the whole of the United Kingdom put together. But when you look at fynbos, it's it doesn't look like very much if you do a scan over an area like this. But once you get down on your knees and you start examining the actual detail and seeing the different types of plants, you realize how much we've got here. Some of these plants are so specific that the entire world distribution is like within an acre. It's their factors of wind, sun, soil type, and all of those factors together contribute towards the ideal growing environment for that plant. And if it doesn't find that anywhere else, so that's why you often find what we call endemic plants that are limited to an area, that they're not found elsewhere. And there's a high level of endemism in the Cape. So, too much development has a big impact on these rare plant species. This is a nice example of pristine fynbos. It's an area that hasn't been burned for quite a long while. But then on the other side there's a recent fire that happened down on the other edge there. You can see the white edge over there. That was quite a devastating fire. Fynbos needs to have fires because it helps encourage all the biodiversity, because there's a succession process that would happen here. The dominant plants would disappear, and then all the pioneers would come in, and what we see as these beautiful spring flowers are all pioneer plants, and they're here to re-establish the vegetation. They're opportunistic, so whenever they see a chance, they establish themselves and they grow. They invest huge amounts in their viability to produce seed and regenerate as quickly as possible. But they're annuals, and they flower for part of the year or grow for part of the year and then disappear. But then the more dominant plants will then use that foothold to re-establish themselves. And it's a cycle of about 14 years. Yeah, just thought we just have a look at this situation where we had a major fire here. It was a very intense fire and pretty much destroyed all the vegetation in this area. Just a few of these protea trees that are still barely surviving. Quite amazing that you...
Well, they survived.
Surviving, actually, you see it got scorched, but you see the new growth over there. It's still viable, so it will survive. You know, the situation like this where fire comes through and sweeps clean is not always negative. You know, there's it makes way for new life. Nature has an incredible way of regenerating. You know, everything can be destroyed, and slowly but surely little seeds, especially of these pioneer plants, establish themselves and then begin a whole new process of life, mainly as anchors to support other plants that become more dominant climax plants later. And I guess, you know, if one looks at life and looks at the success of humans, that does repeat itself in history. That, you know, you have these great empires that actually rise and then something causes them to crash. You know, be it war, be it environmental factors, disease, quite a few things. But life has this thing. It has this renewable energy. It comes from somewhere, and the problem is that us humans build this kind of, get ourselves to this apex point where we are in control of our world, in control of everything, and it's actually a very fragile position to be in, because there's the cycle where nature has this way of building and destroying, and our civilizations are also as vulnerable as a situation like this. So
we might just be being part of nature now, what we do.
Well, the earth has this, and I mean the greatest cities in the world are just as vulnerable. I mean, the foundations might be good, the structures and the construction might be great, but it doesn't take much. It can take an earthquake, it can take a flood or just a fire, or even man himself, to destroy all of that. So we kind of invest too much of our lives in building things of materialistic value, and we attach too much connection to that. You know, it's important to find a balance in life where you know that you are satisfying your absolute needs and not having to be consumptive, and actually build these kind of these towers of grandeur and put too much attention on that value, artificial value system, because it's fragile, as fragile as this environment. But the most beautiful thing of it all is it regenerates. And it's quite significant where we are here now, because when we look at the evolution of man, it is go to venture into a bit of that man originated in southern Africa. No matter who visits the Cape and comes here and experiences this place, no matter who they are, it has some profound effect on people, because I think they recognize something. They recognize that there is this feeling of origin, that you do originate from here some time back. So there's also that process of going through a cycle of not just life, but a cycle of kind of built-in recognition of the communal intelligence of mankind. It recognizes this point of origin, and we might have ventured to all parts of the world and territories and continents and things like that, but when you come to the Cape, you feel there's something special. You feel this homecoming feeling. And so I think that is just an example of what humans recognize in nature, especially a place like the Cape. yeah, it's incredible to see how, it looked very, very bleak a while ago, but it doesn't take long. With a bit of rain and a bit of time, everything grows back. And you come back here in a month's time, you're going to have such a spectacular flower show. Due to this wonderful formation of land right at the tip of Africa, we've got a place which is very unique, and I'll go into the detail of the plants later, but this is a situation where we have a dramatic coastline, with these mountains and seascape, and a little bay like False Bay is also once again a very fragile system. It's an incredible biodiversity of animals that exist in extreme conditions. During the summer months we have winds that blow into this bay here, bringing in warm water, and over the winter months the wind blows in the opposite direction and blows all the warm water out of the bay, and we get pockets of what we call upwelling, where the surface water is blown away and then the deep nutrient rich water comes up from below and replenishes that displaced water, and that brings with it the foundation of life for the ocean, which is all these organisms that have been dormant on the ocean floor. And as they get brought to the surface, where you have this, you see the rings of white along the edge of all this, the coastline is what you're seeing there is actually a plankton bloom. That those organisms are brought into the oxygen rich water, and they suddenly burst into life. And that's the pyramid of the lower part of the pyramid of life that supports this incredible fish reserve and marine biodiversity. So that would what we refer to as the plant version, the phytoplankton, the plant plankton. And then as that food drifts out into this area here, which is mainly the coastline is really made up of pretty cool water. The average temperature is about 12 degrees, so it ranges from really, really cold sometimes to even below 10 degrees, and then it can rise up to about 20 degrees depending on the wind. But this area supports an incredible pelagic reserve of fish, and this plant plankton then eventually gets fed on by the zooplankton, which are the jellyfish and the floating component of plankton, and a bit of krill and all that. And then the other group of fish which live off that, mainly filter feeding fish and anchovies and sardines and mackerel and all that, are then the next level. Great schools and concentrations of that exist off the Cape. Very, very fragile, what they call baitfish reserve. And that would then support the incredible game fish that seasonally exist off the coast here. So the problem is that it's all good and well that nature's supporting itself in a great balance until somebody comes along with a huge net and just trawls that entire pelagic shoal away. And the Cape is very vulnerable in that way. It's quite accessible to fishing vessels. I mean, there's good harbours and good technology, and very soon a fleet of trawlers can discover a shoal of fish. They use all sorts of methods of locating them these days. They use satellite technology. They're able to use they've got various sonars that aren't just like that don't just scan the ocean floor below the boat. They're able to use horizontal sonars, where they're actually able to extend the range of the sonars way beyond the old traditional methods, so they can locate shoals of fish from far away and very strategically bring in a whole team of trawlers and actually take everything. So it is a big issue for us. It is one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. In terms of biodiversity, the South African coastline, which is 3,000 kilometers long, represents the second largest diversity of families of fish in the world. So from the very warm tropical coastline up in on the border of Mozambique, all the way to the really cold and rugged coastline of the border of Namibia. So it's a huge range, and within that range, you've got the pelagic fish, which are the ones that very much occur off this coastline, which live in the cold water, which is the Benguela current. And then on the east coast, we've got fish that are reef fish. So they're a bit more vulnerable in terms of exploitation, because they don't easily regenerate themselves. Because once a reef has been destroyed, it's very hard to kind of build the viability of that reef back again. But a place like False Bay, as I said, it's a place where we've got enormous number of fish that are able to withstand that range of temperatures, that are also very localized, as it's some of the fish up on the tropical areas. And within this bay, we've got quite a number of fish that are endemic only to this area, mainly amongst we refer to them as the little sand sharks, the smaller reef sharks. False Bay is unfortunately quite protected. They don't allow any trawling in the bay here, and the type of fishermen that operate in the area are mainly the traditional fishermen from Cork Bay, who are line fishermen, and a couple of sports anglers. But there are still, in the bay, there are a number of areas which are regarded as breeding sites for cob and for steenbras, and those areas are unfortunately still permit dragnet fishing. So quite often fish that come in to spawn and breed happen to fall within the range of these gill net or land-based net fishermen, and they actually trawl the whole group in and destroy that viable breeding population. But so False Bay is a spectacular area. Good part of it is fortunately protected, and this time of the year we have an incredible gathering of whales, mainly southern right whales, that congregate in these waters.
Impact of on the ground, on the bottom floor of the trawlers.
Well, trawlers don't really operate here, but on the other side of this reserve is an area which we refer to as the canyon area, where the water is particularly deeper than here. And it's kind of the kind of interface where you have the cold water and the warm water mixing, because although we have this cold Benguela current pushing up coming down the coast, pushing up the coast from the subantarctic, we have a countercurrent that comes from the other side, and that countercurrent is usually warm water, and that's where all the predatory fish live. And then you have the bait fish within the colder water. Now that's an area that the trawlers target, because it supports quite a biodiversity of fish, mainly the hake and kingklip. The problem with the trawler is non-specific. They basically create this huge wall of net, and they just trawl everything within range of that. And it takes everything. There's a huge amount of bycatch. It doesn't quite scrape. Bycatch is non-target fish. It could be fish. It could be mammals. It could be dolphins. It could be anything that happens to be in the path of that net is taken. And those nets trawl for 3 hours. And once they pull it out, everything, the contents of that net gets dropped into a hold, and then it gets processed. So in the time of being trawled for 3 hours and then being thrown out of the water into this big cargo hold and then being processed, most of the animals don't survive. So what would happen then is the fishing company would just take out the viable fish, and the rest would just be thrown out the back. There are quite a few other techniques of fishing beyond, other than the trawling, is the long lining. And the long lining is a matter of having a long rope with multiple lines with hooks, which are baited, and it's also quite non-target because they might be looking to catch what they call the normal lionfish by baiting for kingklip and for hake, but they catch quite a number of sharks in the process as well, and those fish don't survive. Other problem with that is the number of seabirds that are actually attracted to this fishing operation. So you've got albatrosses, and you've got shearwaters, and all the incredible flocks of pelagic birds out there that actually follow these fishing vessels, and quite a few of them get dive as the ropes are recovered. The long liners, with each rope with its whole series of hooks, and the quite often albatrosses that actually get impaled on the hooks and brought out. So we lose a lot of albatrosses in the process.